From Status Quo to Solitude. This is the journey between our relentless rut to fulfill ambitions, manage a family, maintain social life, and become the best versions of ourselves physically, emotionally, professionally, to the unquestionable need for our mind, body, and soul to pause, reflect, slow down, and spend time with ourselves to recharge before we can be the charge for everyone else, right? So this podcast started as a shared idea between two women who have spent years inside high-performing systems, corporate, technical, leadership-driven systems. The original conversation we planned were about career, program management, leadership paths, and then life did what it does best. It intervened, health intervened, perspective intervened. What I've learned in that evolution is that it doesn't mean abandoning the vision. Sometimes it just means letting the vision mature. So this podcast isn't about quitting ambition. It's about questioning momentum. It's about asking whether the lives we're managing are actually aligned with the people that we're becoming. So having LaTasha here for the first episode feels like full circle. Not because we're picking up where we left off, but because we're talking about why things shifted in the first place. So when people look at leadership journeys, they often see a clean narrative, right? Degrees, roles, promotions, but lived experiences are so much messier than that. So something I've been thinking about a lot lately is how much of our path is intentional and how much is just momentum. We say yes, we perform well, doors open, and suddenly we're 10 years in before we ask ourselves whether this is still the right direction, right? I know for me, there were phases where achievement kind of became programmed. Competence turned into expectations, and at some point the question stopped being, can I do this? And it became, do I want to keep doing it this way? So with that, I want to ask you my first question, LaTasha. When you look back at your career path, how much of it feels intentional and how much feels like just momentum?
Oh, that's a good one. To be honest, none of it feels intentional because it wasn't like I set out to plan how this path was going to go. I mean, if you've heard me talk about my story, I started out sort of with a fine arts passion, right? I grew up in music, sang competitively for years, played violin, played piano. And so for me, that's kind of the path I was on. And it went to engineering for a second, but then I was already in the retail sort of fast food industry and kind of worked my way up through leadership that way. And with everything that I've been given, I just want to attack it head on. I give my all, I pour into it, and I really do care about the people that I work with, that I get to work beside, or that subsequently would end up working for me. I'm very people focused on that front. When I kept that at the focus of everything that I do, momentum seems to get me there. I just keep performing. With every challenge that you give me, no complaints, no deviations, I just keep performing. And it was never part of the plan. I did decide at some point to make a career pivot again into aerospace and defense. So I got my engineering degree, both bachelor's and master's, and ended up going into aerospace and defense, where I did get a mentor who was like, this is going to be a tough industry to navigate. It's much different probably than what you're used to. You're going to want some sort of plan, a development plan, a career plan, kind of determine where you want to go from here. I laid out what that plan looks like. I never looked at it again until probably some years later. And I looked at it and discovered that I'd actually followed it. Why? Because I let my passion, what I want to do, drive what I put on that development plan. It had nothing to do with being at a certain level. It had nothing to do with a certain role. What it had to do is what experiences do I want to gain at any given time in this journey. And because of that, that's what I chased, is the experiences that I want to gain. I didn't chase promotions. I didn't chase, where I wanted to live. None of that. What experiences do I want my life to have as I'm in this role going forward? And so because of that, momentum seemed to drive me just a little bit more on that front.
That's a very interesting perspective, and I knew a lot of that already, but it still feels very fresh and new. What you're saying resonates because I think high performers are especially vulnerable to that. We kind of just go in and we perform, and then we get to the next stage and we perform. So the part where we actually pause to reflect becomes very few and far between. So anyway. I guess for me, the path was a little different. It was a bit more intentional. I did have some nice early career events. I mean, I was in a similar boat in the very early set of my career because I was part of IT. Never imagined I would be in aerospace. 9/11 happened, and all of a sudden I had lost my very prestigious job that I was very proud of, and I didn't have anything for months until I found something that I thought was a stepping stone to get back into what I love to do best, and here I am 25 years later. So it started off similar to yours, but then everything that I did after that was very intentional. I had 10-year plans, 5-year plans, 2-year plans that I was following very rigorously. I was being the reliable one wherever possible to be recognized. I was saying yes to a lot of things, stretch assignments, and anything that could give me that exposure. At some point, I realized that competence turns into expectations, and then expectation turns into reality, right? So with that, I'll go into my second question. As a leader, what assumptions did you feel the pressure to outperform rather than challenge? So whether it was Bruce Barton or it was Dan or it was whoever the other bosses were, when they had a certain set of expectations of you, were you feeling the pressure to come true on them, or did you ever come to a point where you said, this is unrealistic and I need to push back and I need to challenge?
Yeah, the latter almost never happened with me. I always felt the pressure to outperform. Part of that was because I entered the aerospace and defense industry so much later than a lot of my counterparts. So I always felt like I had to do a little bit more to be at the same level as them. So whatever was given to me, I didn't feel I had the space to say no, or to say, I can't do this, or any of those probably doubting moments that we may talk ourselves through. I didn't feel I had the space to do that because at any given time, it was almost like I feel like someone's taking a chance on me and I owe it to them that whatever their expectations are, I just need to position myself to meet them. Now, was that a right or wrong answer? I will never know. That's probably why momentum drives me, versus hard goals and fast requirements. I'm driven by just wanting to succeed so badly, like with whatever hard thing you give me, I just want to succeed. When I look back over the last couple of years, right, I mean, when you and I were working side by side, I left that role to come over to the space industry. It's totally eye-opening for me. I had no experience in space, even though I grew up in what's called the Space and Rocket Center. So all of this was new to me. And with every assignment that I've been given a challenge program with the team that, had some challenges going on. And with each time, I've just tried to get to a place of right person, right role. What's the strategy that the business needs to move forward to? What are things that we need to put in place to make that happen? And I've had to repivot that probably 5 or 6 times just due to the shift and change in the industry the last couple of years. So with that, every single challenge that I've been given, I just want to attack it head on. I don't have time to dwell on whether I think I can do it or whether it's really hard. I don't have time to push back, to be quite frank with you, because we've got goals to meet. And so once you put goals in front of me, I'm so driven toward that, the rest becomes noise to me at that point. And so, when I look at everything that's been given to me, again, should I have challenged some things? Maybe. I will tell you, I challenge anything that goes against my core values or, just what's naturally how I lead. I do challenge when I need to. Don't get me wrong. I'm I'm not going to just do anything that, just because you're in a position of leadership doesn't mean your direction and your guidance is always right. Because sometimes the direction that we give as leaders is based on a limited set of data. Sometimes we owe it to our leaders to say, hey, I hear what you're saying, but I don't think you're considering this. So I will absolutely challenge when I need to. But I think, just sort of that inner voice that wants to overperform all the time will just naturally go into solution mode and figure out, how do I make it happen?
Yeah, and I think also, as we have grown within our positions and portfolios, we've also gotten better at that. And I speak for both of us, right? The stakes were lower 10 years ago or 7 years ago than they are now, but we still are opening up and pushing back and challenging things where they just don't align with what we think is the best outcome for the business or for the program or whatever is on the plate. So I have seen you do that, and I have cheered you on for all of those scenarios, and I know I've been in those positions as well. I've noticed that also we're often awarded or rewarded for endurance more than sustainability. We just keep pushing, keep going, keep that momentum, and we get the rewards for it. But there's a lack of manageability sometimes or balance that comes with that. Traits like holding complexity, regulating emotions, managing risk quietly. These things don't get an applause, but they take a real internal toll. So my next question to you then is, what leadership traits do you think are undervalued but actually essential to turning a business or a team around?
Oh, that's a good one. I think, when I look at leadership traits that are probably undervalued, I think it's the ability to be able to rally a team and put the right people in the right places and give them what they need infrastructure-wise to be supported. I think that's totally undervalued. We are in an industry that's very performance-driven. It's very metric-driven. It's very deliverable-driven. Very deadline-driven. Cost, goal-driven. It is all of those things. And somewhere in there, you kind of process that, oh yeah, I need people to do that. When I go into any situation, I don't care what the failure is. When I say failure, whether it's we're behind schedule or, over cost, whatever, that's considered a failure when you look at metrics on a sheet. When I go into the situation, I don't start there, because almost always we are not failing due to metrics on a sheet. It's the people. Do we have the right people with the right skill set do we need that they need? And do we have the right resources and infrastructure to help them be successful? I found myself approaching every situation with that. And what's funny is, to people who don't process it that way, it looks like that my focus is not on recovering the program. It looks like my focus is on other things. Mm-hmm. And I know, because I've been told that. They're like, hey, LaTasha, why are you not doing this? We're behind schedule, and, we owe the customer a plan. And I'm like, yeah, the plan needs to be rooted in things that we can actually accomplish. It needs to be rooted in, do we have the people that can actually do it? Do we have the hardware that can actually perform? I don't want to throw a schedule in front of someone that looks hopeful just to say I have a hopeful schedule. I need to be able to perform it and to execute it. So I remember early on in joining this industry, certain people would tell me, hey, LaTasha, you're going to be in leadership one day. And I'm like, I don't mind being in leadership, because I love leading people, and I'd like to be in a position of influence to do that. But what I was afraid of was that what I was seeing around me, I wasn't sure if my approach and my style had a place in this industry. So I just kept doing it. And one time I heard whispers on the wall. Just last year, I heard whispers. And it was probably because I just asked my boss. He was in the role temporarily anyway. So I was like, what do I have to lose? I was like, hey, what are they saying about me on the street? Because we don't normally hear the conversations that happen when we're not in the room. He was like, well, LaTasha, you are known for the way you can rally a team in the most complex like situations, right? And also cultural transformation, how you are able to transform how things are being done one way into something that can make it successful. And I'm paraphrasing what he said, but that's essentially what it boiled down to. So, hearing that from, a boss that, had seen me work through some extremely hard challenges sort of reassured me that maybe how I do things is not so bad. And maybe it's a welcome breath of fresh air in an industry that, sees sort of rudimentary type of leadership style.
I'll just chime in here for a second. I remember when we were on the same team 7 years ago, I remember that being my thought, that you are a breath of fresh air. The way that you manage the teams and the way that people gravitate towards you definitely is your superpower. So I completely agree with what your boss or your manager had said. And it resonates very personally with me. But I'll go back to one of the things you said, right? Putting the right people in the right places. And it's a very important pivot because you can put the most competent person in a role and don't give them direction. And doesn't matter whether they're at a high level position or low level position, but if you can't define their success criteria, they're eventually going to falter, right? And I've been in those situations as well, so I speak from personal experience. We managed to find workarounds for it and survive and succeed and actually thrive anyway. But when you put the wrong person in the wrong role, you really do an injustice to the whole team. So a part of that also aligns to emotional intelligence, right? Anyway, moving on to the next topic, I want to talk a little bit about your voice in leadership, right? So, really leadership and the invisible costs. So leadership looks impressive from the outside, but inside it often looks like constant decision making with incomplete information. And one thing I've noticed in leadership is how often we're rewarded for saying yes rather than staying stable, right? So we talk about turning programs or business around, but we rarely talk about what leaders have to suppress to do that effectively. So how did you personally learn the difference between pushing through and pushing past your limits?
Part of the hard part is, when a program is in a tough position, I call it Monday morning quarterback, right? If you watch I'm a heavy football watcher. And when you're in the moment, especially when you're watching from your television and you get to rewind and watch replay, it's easy to say the things that you should have done or, you could do better. And even more importantly, in the moment, it's easier to say what you should do when you're not the one having to make the decision to do it. So ask me your question again.
Yeah, no worries. I think I'm going to chime in before I ask that question again. But,
Okay.
When I was in MBA, we had a case study for the fire at Man Gulch. I don't know if you've ever heard of that fire. It was sometime in the 50s, and it was about 13 firefighters that were airlifted down to this fire area, and the fire, suddenly the winds turned and their lives were in danger, and there were a lot of leadership lessons involved in it. The team didn't actually follow the leader at a very critical time when he was doing something counterintuitive, and the two that followed him survived, and the other 8 or 9 that didn't ended up losing their lives. And really the lessons were around how he had not led the team effectively from the very beginning and earned their trust enough for them to close their eyes and really follow him. So you talk about Monday morning quarterbacking. I mean, this story happened over 70 years ago, and we're still talking about it, and we're still Monday morning quarterbacking that he should have done that, or they should have done it this way, and the lives would have been. And it resonated with me after all these years, 11 years later. It's still so fresh in my mind because it was a heart-wrenching story. It was very sad, But at the same time, can you really blame a leader in such a critical situation? I mean, yes, there are leadership lessons to learn from, how you can start and build a team from ground up effectively. But sometimes when critical part comes, you never know how you're going to respond, how they're going to respond. It's difficult to tell. But yes, you can do all the groundwork that you need to do, and you can still shift perspective. So anyway, the question was, how did you personally learn the difference between pushing through and pushing past your limits?
It's easy to look back and say, I should have done things differently. Why? Because now you have the gift of experience of that same situation in your pocket. So of course you can do things differently. But before it happens, you don't know that. You don't know what could possibly happen. Like, the gentleman who was leading that team, if he knew he was going to lose, some people, right? Would he have made a different decision? Probably.
Yeah.
It's easy to say that once it's happened. But leading teams through these complex type of situations, I mean, at any given time, with the data that you have, you always want to make that right decision. You and I sit in a very unique place, Dhwani, because I think I look at us kind of like middle management, right? There's a chunk of leadership above us. There's some leaders that are below us. We're right smack in the middle, where we're not in the day-to-day, like on the floor doing the work. We're actually there overseeing and, giving them what they need. But we're also not way up here making strategic decisions that affect the whole entire company. We're right in the middle, where we have to balance giving people what they need to be successful while also supporting the leadership and what they need to lead this company in the direction it needs to go.
Yeah, that's a very good point. All right, so I guess what I want to do next is transition into health, resilience, and trauma. So resilience is one of those words in my mind that sounds like a praise, but often functions like a demand. So I've been reflecting a lot on how often we celebrate pushing through without pausing to ask what's being overridden in the process. Intuition, exhaustion, emotional bandwidth. There's the dramatic kind of trauma that people recognize, right? Like everybody recognizes the usual suspects. But then there's the quieter, the cumulative kind that shows up as burnout, numbness, or chronic stress. And that's the kind that I think a lot of the high performers carry without naming, right? I know that for me, my postpartum depression and working full time and breastfeeding and managing stressors at home, that was a unique period, very defining period for me, but a very unique period. I often wished or thought about quitting and staying home and just, bringing my mental and physical state back to baseline before restarting, right? Body signals that we keep ignoring, and ignoring the body, it doesn't make you stronger, it just delays the reckoning, right? So my next question to you is, did you ever face anything like that where you ended up stepping back and really looking inward at your health, and what did stepping back teach you that pushing forward never could?
Oh, that's a good one. You talked about a lot there, when you talk about the external factors that we have to deal with. And because we are in positions of leadership, sometimes it's almost like we're expected not to adjust that part. Like you come to work, you execute, put 100% into what you do, lead the team forward. We have goals, we have missions, things we have to meet. And somewhere in there, self gets lost. And I'm talking health, I'm talking, our personal lives, right? We're parents, we are siblings, we're children, right? Because we have parents. We're at that age where our parents are starting to age. And you lose sight of that. I'll tell you what made me step back a bit. And I had several deaths, right? COVID came along and we had a lot of loss in there. But what did it for me was when I lost my mother, because I couldn't process that first. How do I go back to work to be this high performer, getting 100%, being there, being present. When I have lost my mother, I've lost the person who birthed me into this life, and there will be a life that I will never know her again. I couldn't process that. And a lot of times we don't address that part of life that hits us like a rock. Stepping back in that, to be clear, when I lead people, I am always trying to think of them first, right? Starting off in the service industry, right? Retail, fast food, that's all service, so to speak. Starting off in the service industry, it is so imperative that you address people's mental first, because their mental is what is interacting for the service. So I was always programmed to do that. But it was a major reset when I lost my mom. And I think it helped recalibrate me, because I've now gotten into some very complex roles, and I've had teams that have this stuff happen to them and have been in positions before where they didn't feel like they could tell their leader, I have this major thing that's happening, whether it's health, whether it's death, or whatever that looks like. They feel compelled to address it in the time that work or industry gives them to address it. What do I mean by that? You talked about postpartum. So think about, when you take time off for maternity leave, we're forced to address whatever that package looks like in the time that work gives you off, whether that's a month, whether that's 2 months. Same thing with bereavement. I was forced to address however I felt about losing my mom in the time that they gave me off to bereave. And I think we have to look beyond that and realize that we are human first, and how we address those factors determines how we show up in the workplace. I was a person that never addressed my health. I started working out 10 plus years ago for sure. But before that, I never addressed my health. I was grossly overweight, had all kind of, should I say, early onset medical issues. And I just felt like it'll work itself out, because it always did. Or it'll smack me in the face and I'll address it when I need to. Never thinking about how proactiveness could prevent a lot of the grief on the backside of that. So I think, as I got older, I started addressing my health, and like losing my mom forced me to start addressing my health, because a lot of, what she went through toward the end could have been avoided had she addressed it early on. We find ourselves being reactionary instead of proactive. Yeah. And that forces us to then, deal with it in sort of an ad hoc, chaotic way, instead of pre-planning what that can look like and digesting it in bites, if you will. So when I look at how my leadership style is sort of shaped, it's shaped because I'm willing to step back. It's shaped because I'm willing to address not just the metrics on page. I'm willing to address the health. I'm willing to address not just physical health, mental health. I'm willing to address, just all of those external factors that play into how we show up at work every day.
Yeah, and I think your fitness journey and your physical transformation has been nothing short of extraordinary, and really your consistency over the course of last couple of years just has been definitely inspiring to a lot of the people that know you, that have specifically mentioned that to me and to me personally as well. So so proud of you, and it is phenomenal that you have taken that step and you've stuck to it consistently for this long. So really amazing.
Yeah, there's another part of that. Yeah, there's another part of that too, Dhwani, that, you talk about the consistency over the last couple of years. I mentioned this kind of started me focusing on my health over 10 years ago. What we don't address is when we commit to something and external factors make us, stop. My journey has been like this, and I'm talking growth waves in one direction or the other. I'm not talking 10 pounds here, 20 pounds there. It's like 100 pounds here, 80 pounds there. And if you look back at my journey, you can tell I must have been going through something through those ups and downs. No one talks about how your mental has to recover when you're trying to get back in the game after that, what I'll call downfall. You've committed, you're in it, and then you have some slope that slides you back down. You have to start over again. And I've had to do that 3 or 4 times. The mental toll that takes from you. No one really talks about that part. And then you still have to keep showing up. So no, I appreciate that recognition. It's given me the boost I need to hopefully not go down the slope again, to stay sort of lifted. it's just so easy to let those external factors drive, where your next decision goes, where your behaviors go, where your habits go. It's so easy. You can make an excuse for it. Oh, I've had some health things going on. Oh yeah, I've got those health things. That's why I haven't worked out. Who cares what I have to eat? I've had these health things. That's why I haven't, it's an excuse at this point. And so, the health toll, the mental that it takes on you to be able to get back in the game after those slides, I think is also something to be admired.
Yeah, and funny you say that, because that is exactly how I handled my postpartum depression, right? I was going through a challenging time for almost a year. And, by the time that, my daughter was about 10, 11 months old, I was getting sick of it, right? I knew what was happening to me. I just didn't have enough control over it, and life was not budging, right? There were all these responsibilities and obligations that weren't going anywhere, right? I wasn't healing mentally, physically, emotionally. It was just, going in a rut, and I needed something to change. And I was so determined to make that change. I knew that there was a way to get out of it. I just needed to find a way. I unfortunately didn't seek professional help. I should have, but I didn't. But then I found my tribe, and the tribe really pulled me through it partially. And the other part was I went back, and because I wanted to gain my confidence back, my strength back, emotionally and mentally, I went back to do an MBA. So I went back to school when my daughter was just a year and a half old. Everybody was pushing back and almost mocking me, like, you have a young child and you're going to go back to school? Do you not want to care for your child? And what are your priorities, right? But I needed to do it for myself, for my daughter, for my family, and for my work, right? I needed to do it for my future, not because MBA was going to get me from point A to point B, but because I needed to get my self-confidence back. So that's how I handled it. And once I got my mental state, and it helped. It absolutely helped, because it pulled me out of the day-to-day cycle that I was in for a year and a half. And finally, I was focused on something else, something with tangible milestones and tests and things that I needed to submit and everything. So I didn't have too much more time to wallow in self-pity. I was focused. I was intentionally getting my confidence back. So for me, that's what pulled me out.
That you say that, because going back to the earlier questions where you asked me, does momentum drive me or what else? And the reason I'm able to get into some of these situations and just go 100 miles an hour is because I am goal driven. I told you I don't pay attention to the noise or anything. And so to your point, being able to get back on that horse, you and I are both very goal driven. And sometimes it's like if we feel like we're in a space where there's not something that we're not running toward, aiming toward, goal, if you will, we sometimes get lost. And it's like, what steps or behaviors should I be doing if I don't have this goal, or something like that. It does make you lose confidence a bit, because it's like, where do I fit in this picture of no goal, no focus, no, so I definitely understand what you mean by that, especially with us, like I said, being goal driven. You put that MBA goal up there, and at that point, none of the noise mattered. You just went laser focused, and you did it. And all those, naysayers at that point don't even matter, because you did it,
Yeah. To be honest, for me, stepping back, mentally and also at times physically, it forced me to confront how much of my identity was tied to expectations, right? Work, family, society. So when your sense of self-worth is connected to performance, rest can feel uncomfortable. Slowing down can feel like a risk. So sometimes you just have to disconnect from those expectations and really reflect inward, right? One of the things that I appreciate about this phase of life is that it's made me more patient, not in a passive way, but in a strategic way, right? Like solitude to me isn't isolation, it's space. It's the room to hear your own thoughts again without, the constant feedback or validation. I think success starts to look different when you're no longer trying to outrun yourself. So with that, how has your definition of success changed over time?
Good one. That's a good one. I think, and I started out in aerospace and defense, like we just talked about, having to switch industries. But, let's just talk about how vastly crazy that is, especially being up there in age. I'll just leave it at that. But I just wanted to be successful. I didn't know what that looked like in my head, but at any given time, I just wanted to be successful. That's why I didn't chase promotion. I didn't chase job titles. I didn't chase roles. I chased success. I chased, what goodness looks like, I will say. And as I matriculated through this leg of my journey, when I give advice to like mentees that ask me, about something very similar, what does success look like to you? And I told them, I said, success for me is inner. And because of that, I'm never running towards something. Because if you're always running towards something, you'll never get there because you keep moving the goalposts, right? So for me, success is a now, and I couldn't always say this because I always use my success to be measured about what other people thought my success should look like or what goodness looks like to them. My success is when I can lay my head down at night and know that I've changed someone's life or that I've made it a little bit easier or that I've given them a smile. I'll tell you what made me recalibrate. I probably have to recalibrate every 2 to 3 years because of just the wave of change that life gives you, right? Especially after COVID. I feel like 2020 came and then 26 is down here. But, when I look back at there are moments in my career I'm not proud of. Part of that was because I was letting my success be defined by someone else. And because of that, I could never get there because it's not what's centered for me. And realizing what is required for you to be successful, how you align that with everyone else's expectation is the beautiful, what I call sheet of music. I always think it's beautiful that I started in fine arts because I'm always looking for, in the workplace, creating the perfect harmony. There's no perfect, but you don't want like off keys and things. Yeah. But when you can merge together your success based off what other people think their success should look like, if you can find a marriage, that's when your performance really shines. For me, the moments that I'm not proud of is when that was off kilter. I lost track of what success looked like for me and started trying to conform to what success looked like for everyone else. It caused me to do things that I wouldn't ordinarily do as a leader. It caused me to approach things that I would, in a certain manner that I would never do. It caused me to say things to peers, to coworkers that I would never say. I wasn't disrespectful by any means, but it's not the type of leader that I want to be. So because of that, it was such a recalibration for me to say, success looks like to LaTasha these things. And oh, by the way, it's not determined by someone else's determination or value or their expectation of what my success should look like. And I'm not saying we don't have goals. We don't have, things that we have to march toward as a team, as a company. We have all of that. The day-to-day, though, successes look different. And so for me, that's how I reached a good place of peace, as you would call it, solitude, is when I stopped letting how I measure the success of LaTasha be determined by what others measure that to be.
That's amazing. I love that. One of my favorite quotes, and I often repeat this, is excellence over perfection. I always say that perfection is subjective. Excellence doesn't change, right? So as long as you are performing in a way that is collaborative, that takes your team with you, and not put them at odds with you, and you're able to validate that, you know, everything that you're doing is in everybody's best interest. That's success. So I love everything that you said. So I think we're coming to the end. I've got a couple more here. This is a very critical one for this conversation. So LaTasha, what would you say to someone who's afraid that slowing down means falling behind, especially for people like us in the middle management and in middle age?
It means falling behind. Wow. So I mentor a guy, and I kid you not, every conversation we have, this topic in some form comes up because he's such a high achiever. It's been implanted in him from his family, from, you know, all his life. He's been up at that high achiever. So because of that, he has in his mind where he should be, right? And I always ask him, compared to who? Compared to what? Because essentially we all have, you know, we all have very unique journeys that we're marching. And so when you look at, you know, what am I measuring myself against? What am I running to? What am I hurrying up to get to say that I've arrived? When will I know I have arrived? You know, what am I afraid of getting behind on? Because if you feel like you're getting behind on something, that means there's some arbitrary goal that you put in place. And now you have to ask yourself, what's that goal based on? At the simplistic level, I remember being, you know, coming out of high school, and several of my classmates, no offense to anyone, this is just goals that you have. Back when we played the match game of, you know, you were going to have this many kids and have this house by this time and have this job and be making this much money. Who defined what that looked like? Who defined that I must have 5 kids or 3 kids or any kids at all? Who defined that I had to go buy a house when I want to live in a state where the market's always crashing? I mean, these are things that you have to think about. I personally don't get caught up in the grind of it all, because this is a journey, and we get so caught up in the journey of getting there really fast that we miss all of the destinations along the way, right? It is a journey that if you don't appreciate all that it has to offer, then whenever you get to whatever end goal that you're trying to get to, you may not be fully equipped or prepared for it because you missed all the destinations along the journey, right? I picture it like I'm on a road trip and I have to stop to get gas, but I'm so in a rush to get to my destination, I don't want to stop for the gas. Well, what's going to happen? You're going to run out of gas.
That's right.
You have to stop along the way and take in these things. You have to eat, right? I want to get there so fast, I'm not going to stop to get food. How's that going to work out? You have to take advantage of the journey that you're on to be able to appreciate that final destination when you get there. And oh, by the way, who says there has to be a final destination? It's a journey. And really, your final destination is when you close your eyes for your final time.
Absolutely.
Until
I was just
then,
going to say that. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Until then, this is all a learning journey. You know, I won't get into religion or anything like that, but growing up, my family was super in the church. And one of the songs that we used to listen to all the time was, "This is just a rehearsal. When we get to heaven, we're going to really sing." You know, because we were singing in the church. So not that, you know, not saying what you believe in or where you think you're going to go, but that's it though. This journey, it's all just that. It's a journey. Take it in. Every day is a rehearsal for the good thing. Call it that. What is that good thing? The good thing is when you can close your eyes for the final time and say, well done.
It's funny you say that.
I don't feel like, go ahead.
It's really funny you say that, because my mind was headed straight in the spiritual realm as you were talking, right? But I was gonna refrain from it. But really, you know, 2 things that you said really resonate with me. One, you know, you really run out of gas, and And I have seen that happen so often in the women that I have mentored, and men I have mentored over the course of last couple of years. Once you get into a professional workplace environment, you stop investing much into yourself. You get, roped into this cyclical rhythm that, you're not really filling yourself up to sustain that for a while. You're just running on empty cup over and over and over again. So we really need to learn to pause and reflect and refill our cup, right? So that's number one. And the second part was around expectations and desires and goals that we assign ourselves, right? This is where I'm going to be at this point, and then this point, and this point. And I'm guilty of that as well. I have done that throughout my life, right? But in the 40s, I have learned that all of this is all great, but running after them without any regard for the other aspects of your life, and not bringing the whole version of you together, and just trying to speed through one lane or the other lane one at a time, that doesn't serve us too well, and we need to really be mindful of that. And those are the two takeaways for me from everything that you said. So
yeah, if I will add on one more point, when you're always trying to hurry up, you miss the peace in the now. You miss being present in the now, because you're always chasing the very next thing. What is it? Yesterday is gone. Tomorrow's a mystery. Today is a present. That's why it's called the gift, if you will, or called the present, which is a gift. So, I try to make a conscious effort to be present in the now. That's another way that I'm able to really lean into the journey instead of being caught up in the grind. You're absolutely right. We attach our identity sometimes to the grind, to the next thing, to the level that we want to make it to. That's what we end up attaching our identity to. And that's okay if that's truly your identity. But I'm willing to bet that there are some people who attach that as their identity, and it's really not. They're also a mother, a sister, a daughter, a cousin, a community advocate. Insert here all these other things that they are that suffer because they attach themselves to the grind of just one thing.
Right. And also, it's not just that, right? Even if you were to look inwardly, right? You also have your own aspirations, or you had those when you were a child that you gave up, right? Or when you were a young adult, whether you wanted to learn horseback riding or singing or play an instrument or make clay pots, whatever it was. But you gave up on that because life got in the way. And what I'm trying to say is, if you bring those things with you as you make that progression through life, you would be a lot happier and more fulfilled person.
That's right. That is spot on. Yeah, because, when you talk about parts of your life that suffer, it's because you're compartmentalizing them to be that way, right? I had a boss at one time, we always used to talk about work-life balance. And he would tell us, I don't balance work. I integrate work. He does work-life integration. How do you, bring them together? So as much as you can, bring your family to the work world. As much as you can, bring work home, not home, but, how do you merge the two? I'll tell you, I'm not good at it because I like to have separation. But where I can, if I'm doing something, like an activity for work, after work, I try to bring my family along with me, and vice versa, if there are things that are happening with my family, and I think, work employees or peers or things would love to be integrated into that, I try to bring those together, because as much as we try to separate the two, we spend the majority of our awake hours at work with our coworkers, right? Yes, we have family time, but if you think about it, we're at work 9-10-hour days sometimes. Yeah. How much are you really awake a day? Maybe 14-15 hours a day. So then that's 4 or 5 hours for the family?
Yeah.
Kind of. And somewhere in there, you have to get time for yourself to just kind of unwind. So because of that, the better you can integrate the two, to your point, instead of making it so compartmentalized, the better.
Yeah. All right. So before we wrap up here, do you have any parting thoughts for us, LaTasha?
I have no parting thoughts. Thank you for having me. This was great. So refreshing.
Yeah, no problem. So this was my attempt at bringing ourselves out for this little time that we had from our rut, from our status quo, from our grind, from our race, to some solitude, some reflection, looking inwards, right? So what I'm taking away from this conversation for myself is that growth doesn't always announce itself loudly. It's not always about acceleration. Sometimes it just shows up in quiet redefinition. So the status quo will reward speed, visibility, and constant motion, but solitude, it will invite discernment. So if there's one thing that I hope the listeners sit with after this episode, is that slowing down doesn't mean you're falling behind. It just means you're finally starting to listen, right? So this podcast to me is an exploration, not a set of answers. And this conversation is exactly why it exists. So LaTasha, I'm really grateful that we got to do this together. It really does feel like full circle in the best way. I wish you all the wonderful health and fulfillment of all of your dreams and goals in the coming year, not just professionally, but personally as well.
Thank you, Dhwani.